Oh, goodness. Welcome, everybody, to our second session for the DNA interest group this year. And we are tackling a really big subject this time because we're bridging it across 2 different weeks. So if you didn't get all the way through that ensemble chapter, we're assigning it to you for next time. So there's a lot of science in this one. It's a really big one. So we're not really sharing each other's research. We're literally trying to learn about DNA. So honestly, I better turn it over to the expert over there, to Linda, and let her get going and drive this bus where we're supposed to be
Drive the
going
bus.
today.
Well, mostly discussion. But first, I want to say, was there anybody had any questions left over or thought about from last time till now? I know we had one earlier, but any other questions just about the intro? Now, John, you're new, right?
I said I watched the YouTube.
Right. Have you done your DNA?
Yes, it's been done.
Okay.
I think I have my heritage. I think Ancestry too.
Okay, cool.
I have a note to myself to check what it was because I don't actually know.
Well, you got to get back into it now.
Kathy was also new, I think, right?
Yeah. And Kathy, you've done your DNA?
Yes, I did it on Ancestry, and yes, I have it.
Okay, cool.
Where was the last week's YouTube so I could see the class from last week?
It's only for those who bought the full package. According to the thing, I think you only bought each individual after that date. So go back and see.
All right. Okay, let me check. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Okay.
Let's see. And then actually, I guess because we're doing this, maybe we should just review really quickly as far as, yes, I have had my DNA tested through Family Tree DNA, but that's it. I have my brother through Ancestry. Linda, you've done several of them, right?
I've got 4. I've not done living DNA. So, Joyce?
I have Ancestry in my heritage, and living DNA will definitely be my next one.
Okay.
I'm interested in that, but I've done the 2 so far.
Okay, Alice?
And so has my husband.
Oh, cool.
I've done Ancestry and FTDNA. I've done the Family Finder and MTDNA, and then I've had my brother do the YDNA, and I have done. I've been on ZMatch, and then My Heritage and Living DNA, and then my another one that has to do with Europe. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Joy?
I have done Ancestry DNA, and I did that a while back, so I've got those results. And then after the last session, I sent off for the Family Tree DNA and Living DNA.
Cool.
Hey.
Okay, Penny?
Calling Penny.
Penny.
And if Penny doesn't want to talk.
Sorry, I was muted. I didn't realize that. I have done Ancestry, 23andMe, My Heritage, and Family Tree DNA, and I have uploaded up to Living DNA.
Oh, cool.
I'm addicted.
I know. I know the feeling. I represent that remark. Totally. Okay. Have you all had a chance to go over the material beforehand? The chapter and the videos?
Some, but not all.
Some, but not all. Okay. Do you have any questions on ethnicity before we get into some specific examples of what you may or may not see?
I found it complicated.
I understand what I've done so far, but I know there's a lot more to learn. So.
Okay. And you find it complicated?
Just, I think it's going to take a while to grasp it all.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And one thing to remember about this is it's always going to change, because a key word to remember is it's an estimate.
I have a question.
Yes.
When they change their areas for ethnicity, why do they kick out what was there before? It's still there. I mean, it's not gone anywhere.
I think it's more a case of kind of like drilling down and getting it a little bit more accurate in it, because for a long time mine was Eastern European and would hit Germany. And then when I just looked at it this week to prepare some examples here, Poland has finally popped up. And Germany has kind of gone to the background. But if you think of Europe, especially Europe, people migrated all over. And a lot of it depends on how long people have been in the area and what they're using as the key group that they're looking at, the population that they're looking at, and how long they've been in the area. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess. I don't understand why they act like it just washed away.
It's the algorithms that keep altering and changing. And if you watch Diane's thing, she pointed out, the timing of it, of when they did the testing, the location and the population that they looked at, and they're constantly redoing their algorithms. And a lot of them, as it explains a little bit in the book, is you can put the same DNA in an algorithm and come up with different results each time.
Plus, I think now we see a lot more ethnicities than we used to. They used to aim for your top 5, but your top 5 ethnicities was all they would report to you. So if you had lower percentages, so let's say those new algorithms, put your percentages, just skewed them so heavily in one area that one that you were a little bit more dominant, because I've seen that, like literally I have seen the switching back and forth, and it's been kind of crazy. But yeah, some of them will literally almost completely disappear, but yet you're right, it's still there. And that's right. Why when we get into the next chapter and we talk about like GEDmatch and the other tools out there, GEDmatch is a place that I can literally see all the different, even the tiny little percentages that the main companies may appear and then disappear. It's like a hat trick. 1 minute there and then gone the next. And so GEDmatch is a little bit more consistent for me, that I can see the full list of my ethnicity.
And I'm guessing too that if you read part of the autosomal chapter, they talk about the baseline for centimorgans in it. And I would say the algorithms probably incorporate some of that as far as how much DNA is shown in that area to determine if it is the high enough area to be considered to be listed. My mind's just going blank. I apologize there.
Well, and also whenever they change an algorithm like that, it's usually like a testing dump. They put in a bunch of new testers that they have put in there. It's not like a real time where the algorithm is shifting all the time. They won't change the algorithm for what? Sometimes Family Tree DNA, one of mine, I think it was almost like a 5-year spread like that. And all of a sudden everything changed for everybody because they literally just changed it based on a big dump of people instead of slowly as it's, in real time. It just doesn't work that way. Although they're much faster now. Honestly, they're updating it a lot faster, but
yeah, it all depends on how they've got it set up. And that's why it's really important to look at the company you're with and find out more about that company as far as what they consider, how they consider it, how much, how many centimorgans, how many markers, how many, what constitutes part of their determination for it, because it's going to change. It's just an estimate. They're still working on trying to get it back. And the question is, how far back is it? Is it just a few generations back or pinpoint? A lot of the companies now are trying to drill down to certain localities, which is kind of cool if you look at it. Let's just go ahead, if we will, and kind of walk through some of the examples I have up here, just so you can kind of get an idea and a comparison. And then we can kind of talk about them with what you've read in the chapters and what questions you may have. Okay. I'm going to try sharing a screen. But you can see over here, Scotland on Ancestry, the 4th column, 34%. That was this, I'm sure there's Scottish ancestry because I can roll the tongue and I love the brogue, that kind of thing. But I'm surprised it was this much. Until you start to think about more people are testing, if they do target groups over in Scotland, Ireland, Wales, some of these are going to show up more. If you look at, let's see, Portuguese and Spanish. Now my brother showed up with a little bit of that, but that's a first for me, 0.8%, but it's still small enough to be a false positive in a sense. Okay, do you guys understand what false positives are? We learn about this more in autosomal DNA, but it's basically, it's too small to really say for sure exactly where it came from. But you can see the breakdowns. Each one is a little bit different in what they're doing. And they even get down. Now, Finnish has been in there as a small amount almost from day one. And Finnish, Native American, Ashkenazi, and the other Jewish one all have specific markers that if you're showing up with 1, 2, even 3% or something, it's basically supposed to be accurate that you do carry that heritage. Now, the smaller the percentage is, it may be the further back it goes. Anybody have any questions on looking at any of these that, or comments about your own differences that you see each time you bring it up? There was a point about, was it 2019, when we were at Roots Tech and they made a big upgrade, and all of a sudden everybody was like 50, 60, 70% Scandinavian.
I remember that.
Remember that? It's like, wow. And in my heritage, it's still there. But you've got to stop and consider and look at how my heritage collects it, what their population is, and where it's going with it. So it's really important to know that these are estimates and it's based on what they use to create the algorithm. Does anybody want to share any of what they've learned through their own comparisons, those, especially those who've tested or uploaded in other companies? Are they pretty consistent for you?
You're making me want to go pull up my MyHeritage now because I haven't looked at them in a while.
Yeah, and another thing that they're all trying to do too, because this, again, as I've said, I may not have said it here, but I've always said it in the past, these are businesses and they're all competing with each other. And these, my 23andMe, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage will give you the chromosome lengths and stuff like that. Ancestry doesn't. But Ancestry's big plus is they have all the family trees. And those are coming into play with their algorithms. The downside is not all of those trees are necessarily well documented and accurate.
They're very inaccurate, a lot of them.
Right. So you've got to stop and consider, there's so many things to consider with it that you really need to think about it, come up with a theory, and really test that theory. You know, assume that whatever you think it's showing may or may not be right. And we're going to really learn that in the autosomal.
I have a question. Would you then recommend that you get 2 or 3 of, you find, you don't just have one test from one company, but you then identify, you know, I can see where I probably need to have 2 or 3.
Right.
So you would recommend getting 2 or 3?
Yes, because if
Okay.
it's consistent throughout, then that means all the different algorithms they're using, you're strongly showing that ethnicity area.
Mhm.
And some of them you can upload. I need to check on Living DNA to see if you can just upload something you had from another company. Ancestry won't let you do that, but always catch a sale. And fortunately, there's multiple sales every year. Now,
Okay, so here's the thing. I pulled up the MyHeritage for me, and I think it's funny. And Ancestry is doing the same thing where they've got these weird clusters, genetic clusters that they're showing you. Like for me, have a heavy Appalachian cluster, the Ohio Valley cluster. And so MyHeritage is doing the same thing. They're calling them genetic groups.
right.
They're not calling them ethnicity. But like they've got 3 groups for me. They've got Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, and West Virginia. Southern USA, Kentucky, Ohio, Virginia, and West Virginia. It's like they've duplicated the one. But I'm like, that's really interesting because I remember them just trying to describe how we see those ethnicities in Europe because there was so much mixture going on over so long. It's like us trying to genetically figure out whether we are from Ohio, from Kentucky, from Indiana. It's
Right.
almost
Ancestry does that.
impossible in a way.
Yeah. Ancestry does that as well.
Right.
It will show you where you are in the United States.
And I heard somebody say, that the ethnicity results are wrong based on your document tree, right? Your document trail. And so they can absolutely be wrong based on your document trail. You know, we don't.
Right. The
Excuse me, could I have to ask a question?
Yes,
I think my basic understanding of this must be very, very poor because I'm having a lot of trouble following some of this.
I'm sorry.
First of all, I don't understand how they decide that it's Scotland and Germany and England and all. What do they use as a basis for putting you in that certain area? And
They,
then the
okay.
second question I have, is it Sherry Daniels? You said, oh, I pulled up my ancestry and it shows this, that, and the other. I don't know. How do you do that? Where do you get it?
Okay.
Oh, I'm looking at, because I took my family tree DNA results, the raw DNA, that file, and I uploaded it into my heritage. And so my heritage then gives me those ethnicity results from their company. So that actually is a very important question, because
Right.
there are certain companies you can do that with. Like, for instance, you can technically take Ancestry raw results. So all of these companies, as you test, you can download what they call a raw file, your raw DNA file.
How do
And
you do that?
it's each company's a little bit differently. And we might try to look, we might try to send out something to you guys to kind of give you like the link for each one of the companies to show you how to do that. I'll tell you who actually gives you really good instructions on that is GEDmatch. If you go to
Yeah.
GEDmatch, because what they want you to do is GEDmatch is not a testing company. They are a third-party tool, which we'll cover more next time. But they do give you the instructions for each company where to find those raw results, and you download that. And frankly, personally, I have downloaded my raw results, and I keep those safe. Like, I don't know, like, to me, that's my raw information that's really important. So some companies will let you upload and some will not. So, like, for instance, Ancestry will not allow you to upload your raw DNA results or file to their company. So from anywhere else that you test, you cannot do that. You can download your Ancestry raw results and upload into Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, and then I don't know about the others. So, like, for instance, you know what I mean? So, like, it Ancestry is one of the boogers, but as far as the others, I think the others will allow you to upload stuff.
Or they've gone through spells. One thing to remember too is your raw data is the same no matter what. That is your raw data. So when you put it in with each of these companies, you're going to get different results because they use different algorithms. And to go back to your first question, what they started out doing was they would look for local areas, local communities where the people had been there for a significant number of years. Kind of like generations, is, if they could get them that far. They would then test the DNA and put that into their computing part of it to determine, okay, people that pop up with this same sort of area are from this area. So
That was a question I was going to ask earlier. Does it depend on how much and how often your ancestors moved around? So if they're collecting the information from various geographical areas, it really would depend on if your ancestors were there when,
right,
at a certain time when this testing has
Yeah.
to do with that sort of thing.
They try to focus on those who'd been there, established there for quite a while.
Okay.
And then, because when you look at Europe especially, people moved around quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so depending on where your ancestors were from, with your paper trail, like I said, my paper trail goes to Poland. Right now, I'm doing German records for my Polish ancestors, birth, marriage, death, 1600s, 1700s. But on the algorithms, it came up, didn't even show Poland or Prussia, which it was at the time. But there were so many areas that were German speaking, but they are getting people that are testing in those areas. And it's hard sometimes because the countries do not, some of them have more strict rules about doing DNA tests and stuff and what you can do with that information. And Germany has a little bit tighter rein on DNA that people can take and test and get from other places. You also have, and this could affect Poland especially, but in World War II, company villages had been there for, quite a while established. They started, especially the churches, started creating books of the community, genealogies of the people in the community. Okay. So when you went to that area, say Belschwitz is one of mine, you could look at the Familien book and see what people were there, who their parents were, who their ancestors were. And a lot of times they put down they were Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, or whatever. Hitler comes in, he starts pulling these books. And that's how he identified a lot of the Jewish people. So ever since then, you've got a fear of that, which may prevent people from testing, just like you won't see people who practice Judaism get tattoos because they're not going to mark their body in that way to identify them. So you've got different cultures that are going to look at it in different ways, and some are going to be willing to test and some aren't. And we have to think about that on the local level as well. If we're looking at any of our ancestors or, potential family members, if they're in this way, this may be one of the ethical issues you deal with, knowing that, okay, I know they're Ashkenazi Jew. Will they test or won't they test? And if they've still got strong memories of the war, they're not going to necessarily. Does that make sense? Did that answer your question?
Yes, but one other question. So then they compare all your SNPs or centimorgans and with the SNPs and centimorgans of these little individual communities to see how many of yours match with that. Is that
basically
a rough idea? Okay,
that's a rough idea of it. Yeah. And
just a note, Alice has said 23andMe is like Ancestry. They will not accept raw data from other companies, and Find My Past will accept. I have not actually uploaded mine to Find My Past. However, I'm going to give you the link. I did find there is a GEDmatch info site that shows you, it says help for DNA uploads. It gives you the uploading to GEDmatch, and then each little tab are the different companies. So Ancestry, it gives you the detailed instructions on how to download that. FTDNA, 23andMe, Living DNA, MyHeritage, and Whole Genome. It's cool.
Sherry, do you have to be a member of the other? Do I have to, and mine's Ancestry. Do I have to join MyHeritage then to be able to download it?
Well, they usually want you to create a free account. I don't pay anything for MyHeritage. So no, I didn't. You don't need a subscription. In fact, now Family Tree DNA, I will tell you this, Family Tree DNA, if you upload your raw results, you would have to pay extra to see your ethnicity breakdown, like about $20, but it's good for me for matches. So I put them in there anyway. You can see the matches for free. So they will do the matching part. And yeah, that's what I've done with my brother. I just haven't paid for the extra map yet.
One thing I would also suggest, and Sherry kind of mentioned it earlier, is your raw data, and especially if you're only with one company, you might consider downloading it and keeping it somewhere safe, because you never know what happens with companies and stuff. They may come, they may go. You don't know how long they're going to be there. Yeah. And if you download the raw data, then you've got it.
To me, this is like I said before, I lost my father in April. This is like a genetic heirloom for me. I've got his raw file, and I'm just like, I gotta share this or put this in many, many safe places because I can't get it again.
And for me, that's one reason why I'd go with multiple companies too, is you get the different comparisons. And, we all know that the more times you can prove it that it's there, the frequency of it, the stronger it is likely to be useful.
It's like your social security number, isn't it? Something you need to keep safe.
Exactly. Now, let me do another one. I have got, and some people ask, well, do you do siblings or do you not do siblings? Do you test your siblings or not? If so, why? If not, why? Well, it can be interesting. This is my siblings. There's me, and then there's my 3 brothers. Now, 2 of us did family tree, 2 did ancestry. But you can see the different results in some of the different percentages that come out. And it's interesting because my one brother has Greece and Balkans, less than 1% at this point, but it's like, where did that come from? A new one for me is the Italian, 9%. Now, what this means is we have not inherited the same DNA from our parents. We're all different. So when you put all 4 of us together, we could get a strong idea of who, a match may fall under. Father, mother, something like that. But it's really, you got division of West Slavic and East Slavic. Some of these I'm not quite sure. Sweden came up. And my one brother, that one was new on me. He was Swedish, which is okay. Italian for me. I haven't had Italian pop up anywhere, but there it is. But when you think about Europe and you think about Alsace-Lorraine being French, and right there next to Germany, you got, migration. Some of mine probably migrated at some point in time over the course of it. So it does come in useful. Also, it's useful in that when you're looking at a match and you're trying to decide what side of the family it comes on. Now, I've got one big advantage, and I'm proud of that advantage in a way because it's a big advantage for me. My maternal side mostly came from Germany, Prussia, West Prussia, that area, okay? My paternal side came from, I'd say Eastern Kentucky, but basically from England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland. So I've got the Western Europe and Eastern Europe, which when you look at comparisons, and you can do this on the GEDmatch tool, if you've got at least one parent tested, you can phase in and see there's a distinct difference. If it's mostly from Eastern Europe, then I know it's more likely, not necessarily always, but more likely to be the maternal side. Just as if it was more England, Europe, that kind of point. If it was like my one brother has 26%, if it was like 52% or something like that, you can see the difference. With him, you can see he's got the England, Northwestern Europe, 26%, Germanic, and then we got these others falling into place. But you can almost see the split of where it is. And when you see the match, you put that match's ethnicity up there, and where it falls can help you place what side of the family that match may be on. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Somebody has a question. Or what a company keeps can go bad or expire, or I'm not sure about an expiration date on the DNA. It all depends, I think, on how they keep it.
Well, and family tree DNA is the only one that keeps it, correct?
Family tree keeps it. Well, I don't know. I think 23andMe keeps it too, because they went from when they went from the pre-chip data to the new chip, which was more fine-tuning more of the genome on it. They did not have, some people they had to get additional samples from, and some of us they didn't have to. So they do keep some of it on file, but for how long, I'm not really sure. But the raw data, that's the raw data, that's the actual DNA sample. The raw data is not going to change, and it's not really going to expire because it's always going to be either AC, GT, the linkage of those particular areas.
And that makes me wonder too, like being 2008. So you're upgrading what you had tested in 2008, purchasing the big Y now, and they're wanting another test. my gut says, because that's over 10 years old, I don't think it's necessarily an expiration, but I would bet that the company has probably moved to whenever someone, especially a male, does submit their DNA, I would bet you they actually test for all of it and keep that on file so that if you buy it, they can just send it to you. Do you know what I mean? Instead of doing that analysis only when you order. And see, maybe they weren't doing that back in 2008.
Yeah, I don't think they were. I think it depends. It depends on the size of the sample. And then I think they run a new sample through the process again if they have it. And it depends on how much of the genome they've gotten and what they've looked at. And like you said, they might have only looked at a certain amount of the genome back then. Like 23andMe had the big chip, as they referred to it as at the time, was they, increased the genome that they were looking at, and it required maybe a larger sample, that what they had on file was not large enough. But it does make it interesting. But have you all tested siblings? Found anything interesting?
No, I haven't.
Have.
Unfortunately, my siblings are all deceased. I don't have a chance to do that. I wish I did.
Well, but you can do their kids and
I
kind
may
of
do
piece some
their
of it
kids.
together.
Yeah.
I have, and my brother and I are very different. Very different. I mean, we still have the same, we're still going to have those pockets of North European and the Scandinavian. It's just that I have like 12% Italian. My brother doesn't have any Italian. I even have some Greek. My brother doesn't have any Greek. He got more of my mother's British, Irish, Scottish line. Even though I know he's male, I'm female, you'd think, but again, it's that whole scoop or that bucket that Diane was talking about in the video from our curriculum. And yeah, or as we used to say, when we first used to teach this class, Linda started calling it burgoo. So if anyone is
Vegetable soup, burgoo.
yeah, burgoo, very Kentucky. If you're familiar with burgoo stew, it's full of all kinds of weird things, and it's kind of this almost a scoop of chance of what your DNA makeup really is.
I have an identical twin, and that's all I have. And I have to tell you, Ancestry worked pretty good, because my nephew did it first, and I came out as his mother. And then my sister did it, and then they picked and changed everything and said, "Oh my, we have an identical twin here." So they did pick up on that, but I only have an identical twin. So
okay, so how different were you? I love this that you're attending our class. So how different were you guys in your testing?
we were exactly the same.
Wow.
Well, I haven't looked at the raw data.
Okay.
But I can tell you, the data I've seen is exactly the same.
Okay.
It's going to be more the same, but there are going to be a little bit of differences. They're
Well,
finding out that there are some.
And maybe
Yeah.
that's it. Like she could only see it on the raw, I mean, or really in the chromosome mapping and all that, right?
Oh,
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not that far along, and I'm just trying to get more educated on it. But I have to say we had a lot of fun with the fact that I came up as my nephew's mother.
well, I've got and I tell this story all the time. When Ancestry decided to put in their through lines, I have there's my dad. He has two full brothers, and he has a half brother, which a half brother hasn't tested. Well, the two brothers tested. My dad has not tested. One of the brothers, for some reason, they didn't think the results were right or something. They thought if they got another test, it might show something different. So they have two tests on there. So there's three tests on there. And they put my uncle as my father and my grandfather. So they've still got some, and it's still on there. And this was when they first rolled out with it. So it's still on there like that. So there's some things you have to watch out for with it.
Yeah.
But okay, let's look at the maps, which are kind of interesting. Because when you look at, let's see, my maps are AtDNA is mine, my heritage, and Ancestry over here. And then these are my three brothers' maps. but you can see similarities and then some differences with the ancestry with me and my brother. We've got stronger in one area than he is in one area, and kind of opposites on those. And here's Poland. Finally, for the first time ever, it's popping up. Poland, even identified as its own little thing on family tree DNA. Family tree DNA has done a good job of getting down and drilling down more. But they've also got when you think about it in their database, they've got mtDNA in there as well as Y-DNA, which the other companies don't really look at those. But it is kind of interesting how, Norway, Sweden, and there's Finland, which it kind of touches Finland a little bit. That might be the Finnish. Here on mine, on FTDNA, it hits both sides of it. So mine must have lived on the border.
Yeah. It's like, you got Iceland and Norway there.
Yeah, it's and then one thing too, like MyHeritage, and this is one of the things I like about the companies, and this is where they really start to compete, is if you drill down further, you can see where ancestors are: Glasgow, Newcastle, Manchester, Leeds, London, and these are high pockets of where there is a consistent group enough to be able to distinguish them from other areas in the country.
Where do you see that?
Wow.
That is on MyHeritage.
I know, but how did you get to that? Like I see
Okay.
that.
Wow.
Okay, let me go back to companies here. On MyHeritage, on MyHeritage, when I pull up on the side, it had plus 13 regions.
Okay.
And you go into that, whatever regions they have additional to, and it'll drill down further.
Wow.
So that's a pretty cool one to kind of look at, because that gives you an idea. Because we say in Kentucky, people say, well, I have ancestors born in Kentucky. And our first question is, do you know what county? Because some of our records are based on the county. And you say, I've got them in Ireland, but I have no idea where to look. This will give you places to start. And I mean, if you're just starting out there, Manchester, London, I'd want to start there and then work my way out. So when they start doing, and that's would help too if you're looking on Ancestry and it has the US. Like Sherry said, most of mine are in southeastern Kentucky, Virginia, that whole Appalachian area there, and spread out. And now finally I'm starting to get some northern Ohio and Indiana, which would incorporate my northern ancestors. Not Michigan yet, but that's where they came over and settled. So this really can work hand in hand with working with matches and looking for cousins and sometimes solving some problems. Let me see. Oh, couple things I noted was that, that's for AtDNA. An ancestry skewed. So when we talk about AtDNA, you might, if you think you have some Jewish ancestors for Ashkenazi or whatever, they do have a special algorithm that works with that to identify that. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So do you find the ethnicity results matching your paper trail for the most part? Or have you made that comparison yet?
I have not, and I'd like to know how to do that. That's my next goal. How do you do that?
Well, you've got your paper trail, right? And you know where they're from. You know their point. You map it. If you know, now sometimes some of us, we haven't gotten across the water yet. So where mine are in Ireland and Scotland, I haven't gotten there yet, but I know it's from that general area. If you know they're from England, then that can help narrow it down a bit.
Yeah, I know one or two lines. I don't know them all, but I do know. I do have a couple.
Like,
one I can connect to Germany, and one
Right.
of my husband's I can connect to England. I would like to be able to connect mine to Scottish, my father's side, but I haven't been able to do that yet. I'm hoping the DNA can help.
hopefully it will. And when you look at the matches and stuff, if you look at a match and you pull it up and their ethnicity doesn't have anything in that area, they may not have inherited it, or it may be that they're from the other side of the family. Now, remember too, this is kind of like autosomal DNA in that it is based on what you have inherited from your parents
Right.
and what was passed down.
That's the tricky part, isn't it?
That's the tricky part. And I don't know that people really remember that offhand when they're looking at it going, oh, this is that. A lot of times the smaller the sample, the further back it goes is a consideration to consider. And also whether or not you inherit it, because you do not inherit from every single one of your ancestors. It's all based on what is passed down. And so your paper trail looks at every single one of the ancestors, but your genetic tree, which is what we work on with DNA, is those that you are genetically DNA related to.
When I first got the ancestry stuff on ethnicity, Machlet is obviously German, but they did not have me in Germany. And when then 3 or 4 years later, they came back with something new and said, oh, you are German. So they must have some new information or identification they did. Because when I've been to Germany and I've found the village where my great grandfather actually lived and the church he was baptized in. So
you got it.
Yeah.
And so with your German line, how strong was that for you on the document side? Like, how many branches of your family were German?
Just my father, Machlet.
Okay.
Yeah, all the others are not German.
Okay. And that's the thing with me. Like my grandmother, she was half German. Like that whole line, half of her line was entirely German. It came over in the 1850s. So I know that's a strong German line for us. But like my mother, she's only just now starting to show up a little bit of Northern European. For a long time, she was like 94% British Isles. I'm going, how is this possible, right? But of course, it's that breakdown of percentages in conjunction with those algorithms that change all the time. And so, yeah, she's starting to test now. It's starting to slide south because I know where they were. Like I literally know where that line came from. And it's the line that was like right along France and Germany. So it was north, it was close to Britain, and then it would trail down into Italy. So I know that's where my Italian came from. But it's just amazing to see what she got versus what I got. I mean, it surprises me all the time. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and you have to remember too that sometimes you get part of one side of the family and part of the other side of the family, which may double what shows up there, but it may not necessarily be for just one particular side. I have to remember that on a maternal side, I do have one grandparent that does go way back in Ohio. I've got him back in Ohio in 1850s. I think the aliens dropped him there because I can't get when he married and he took the exact same name as somebody else who married a woman of the same name in the same area. He was in the orphanage, put his kids in the orphanage. I mean, a lot from that point forward, but he was here back in 1850s.
Right.
The rest of the family came over from West Prussia after that point, the other 3 sides of the 4 sides of the grandparents up there. So some of that European could be attributed to inheriting it from my maternal grandfather and not necessarily the Spencers, the Kentucky side.
So can I also just add, I mean, I've been watching the ethnicity estimates and all of this stuff for years. And I think I've tested maybe about 5 years ago or so. And after seeing, I think when I first tested with Family Tree DNA, my parents, I managed their accounts. And so when the maps first came out, I was excited to see that. And I took these screen captures and I took that home to them they had a great time. Literally the next week, they changed the algorithm. It was a 5-year update. All of the maps changed, and I was so mad. I was like, oh my gosh. It made me not trust the ethnicity result maps. And therefore, the thing I like to caution, I think, is that as Diane was talking about in her video, about weather prediction, that some of this is so variable and it changes so often, that I like to say, don't beat yourself up if you can't really understand this part. There's so much, like she called it fuzzy math. There's so much fuzzy math that goes into the ethnicity maps and reports that changes all the time. And yet weirdly, this was really my impetus for doing it. I've never really gotten into cousin matching. I think I played one time with a cousin that I absolutely knew where he fit in to see if I could test the painting and the chromosome mapping. But I mean, I'd like to learn more about that, because I do have some brick walls and I'd like to see who I connect with and everything. But this part was my driving force. I wanted this fun part. I wanted to see if the ethnicity breakdown actually matched my document trail. And so I kind of got frustrated with it, but I think treat it a little bit like, a fun fact at a party in a way, that can change every once in a while. This is not the hardcore science really that we get into DNA with, I think. You know what I mean?
Right.
It changes so much, treat it as fun. I think this is the fun part. Don't take it too seriously, especially if you can't understand exactly what's going on. I did see one of the DNA tools for MyHeritage was showing me, like, for instance, I got into my Italian side and it told me exactly what portions of Italy the bulk of their algorithms were coming from, or the population samples were coming from. That's an interesting read as well, especially each one of these countries. You can click on these and see, all right, where's the bulk of the population comparisons coming from?
And you can just Google some of it.
Mm-hmm.
You can just say ancestry DNA reference populations or something like that, and can take you right to it without having to necessarily search through the entire website for it. But what I try to do for myself is I don't stop with saying ethnicity. I always want to say ethnicity estimates, because that reminds me that these are just estimates. Now, as we go further along and they get better to it, I'm waiting for them to get right down to the house so that, this is a house that was there, which, Google Earth, I've done that with the villages over in Poland and stuff, and it's really kind of cool. But, I'm excited about getting down to the towns and stuff, the areas.
Right.
Because,
go
ahead.
I'm just going to read Alice's comments for the sake of the video so that we can include that in there. But she says she's working on 4 different surnames for results having 111 markers matches to get the big Y, 700 results to document the surnames, paperwork for the Rice family. Could be Wales. One could be in Wales and England years ago. Ended up in Ireland 700 years ago. Big Y 700 for McCracken line. Exciting for the Raymer. And she's administrator. We should probably talk about administration of the accounts, by the way, just FYI. And been to the archives twice in London. Wow. I mean, this is an international research here, Alice.
And Alice, we expect you to really chime in when we cover Y-DNA.
Yeah.
You can give us all the nitty gritty on the big Y.
Right.
As compared to the others.
Yeah.
But yeah, we have a lot of responsibility if we're administering more than our own test. How many of you guys administer other people's tests? Anybody? One.
I'm working on Y-DNA on a cousin. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Administering, you've got to think back to what we covered about ethics and stuff. You really got to stop and think about, because you don't always know what it's going to reveal. And people have got to understand that. Sherry might not appreciate this much, but I can remember her excitement and her frustration with the ethnicity. And she kept saying, I don't want to do the DNA. I want to know the ethnicity. And she really went to town with it, and her family did. And, it makes it fun. But you've got to be prepared to find things that you might not have expected to find. Because it comes out and, especially you may not find that Native American link. That doesn't mean it's not there. It could have fallen off the tree. It was so far back. But then again, it's, there's so many things to consider that people want to jump to conclusions, and you can't always do that. And
Also, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I only see the corner of
I know.
you, so I can't see what you're saying. I see your hand.
So one thing also to remember, as we go back in time, we have so many multiple parents, grandparents, great, 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 great. And we are getting the percentages from, several generations back. What, around five generations or so? That's the multiplication alone. There are multiple opportunities for NPEs, for non-parental events. And then of course, pedigree collapse, where you've got, my grandmother descended from the same man on both sides of her tree. So I definitely have a bigger scoop of some of her stuff than I do with the others. It's stronger strains. So all of that variable, you have to take that in mind with those algorithms, that they're nebulous, the algorithms are, but then our makeup, and then what's actually in our tree based on, we think we know what the document trail is. There could be some episodes back there
And
we're not aware of.
and that's going to show up in the ethnicity estimates too.
Yep.
A lot of times, because I may be strong in one area, but that's because I might have inherited more in one area. But what we don't necessarily know is, did I inherit that from, especially when I think of that maternal great grandfather, was that, who did I inherit that from? Did I get more of it? Or is that one strand? And we get into this in the autosomal. It doesn't really say which side of the family that came on. And so that does kind of impact the ethnicity results in a bit of a way. And that's one reason why siblings and stuff may show different ethnicities. It would have been interesting if the identical twins had different maps for the ethnicity as well.
I'll check on all that. I'll get the raw data and look at be more specific, but.
Did she tested then? Have you looked at her ethnicity map? Does it show up the same percentages and stuff?
You know what? I was looking to see if I have a copy of it, and I don't. So I have a note here to make a copy of it and look at it more closely.
But remember that every time,
basically the same, but I better look.
But even that, it could just be a different dump in the algorithm, because we mentioned earlier that the algorithm may give you different results each time.
Right.
So again, that's something to think about as a theory or hypothesis, but that alone is not necessarily going to prove it.
Well, I will check that out.
Yeah, I'm curious to.
Yeah, I will check that out. I'll get back with you next time.
Okay. What other questions do you have, or uncertainties do you have regarding ethnicity before we shift over to a little bit about autosomal?
Well, I think this MyHeritage drilling down is quite interesting because I felt in Ancestry, it was pretty much what I knew.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of my family seems to end up in kind of the same location. So I'll be real interesting to see if, when you drill down, is it the same location, or did they just end up there, or what happened?
Right. Now, this isn't going to be everywhere, but as they improve it and stuff, we're going to see more and more of this.
Yeah, that's very nice. Thank you for sharing.
And that could be why the Scottish, why there was a heavy focus on Scotland and Ireland. They could have been working on trying to come up with this format of drilling it down, because they look at more and more of the genome and, what they can look at it with and what they can glean from it. Hey, any other questions or anything? Everybody read all that chapter?
Yeah.
Working on it.
And you read the whole other chapter on autosomal DNA, right?
Aren't you glad we gave you 2 weeks for that chapter 4?
Yeah, one thing that's different about the format of this book versus his first book is he does, it seems like in each chapter, go into and compare the companies, which is probably his way of saying that it's important to look at what company you're dealing with to see how they address various aspects of the DNA, which is something we really do need to remember as well.
Well, I think the main point is we can't rely on just one company. We need to probably do them all, or as many as we can. Because
Well,
you're
and
going to get something different from every company, aren't you?
a little bit. And one difference you're going to get from every company is additional matches,
Yeah.
because not
Yeah,
everybody
not
tests
everybody's
at
going to
this.
do them all.
And that's one thing about GEDmatch, and that was one of their strong points, was that you can upload these to GEDmatch and it can be from any of those companies. They don't, control it in the sense that the companies do as far as uploading. So you can have a lot more matches. And that is one tool that is online. There is another tool that I'm going to have to try to work on because I haven't looked at it in a couple of months. There's a program you can get where you can upload everything except Ancestry, because Ancestry specifically said, we don't want you to do that when all this came out about, legalities and stuff. But it allows you to upload matches from the other sites. So you have a good database and be able to work with those matches from that aspect of it. So I'm going to work on that in the next month to be able to kind of give you a little bit of a demonstration of what it is. It's a little bit labor intensive, especially to begin with, but it can help you, cross match things. How many of you have worked with matches yet so far?
I have. I've got a quick question too.
Okay.
On GEDmatch, first getting started and being real excited, I uploaded 2 of my DNA results, and now GEDmatch offers that super kit thing where they'll combine them. Is that a good idea or no?
I've not really heard much feedback on that because I haven't been on GEDmatch in a little while. It'd be interesting to see what happened if they combined them. Because I put up 2 of mine on there just to see if there was going to be any differences in the results, because I got kind of curious. Is there going to be, what kind of difference is it going to be if it's the same raw data with the different companies? Are they going to upload something different? It should be the same. If they're dealing with the raw data, it should all be the same. But I may experiment with that and see, because I need to get back into GEDmatch. If I didn't have such a, demanding supervisor that just kidding.
You're up for a raise. You're not getting it now.
Oh, dag nabbit. But does everybody have a general grasp of autosomal DNA?
Yep.
Yep. And have you worked with any of the, you understand the centimorgans and snips and snaps and snups and those things? Okay. Like I said, this was a very long chapter to get into, but when you go through this chapter, and I would really encourage you guys to read this chapter, because there are some things that we need to keep in mind when we go through this that we think about at one point in time and then we forget. It does go into the different companies. So pay attention to what the minimum threshold is for that company. Okay, because that minimum threshold is excluding some potential matches and including others. So you get false positives and stuff. So if you end up with something really quirky, and I mean, the way they explained it in here, and I hadn't really thought about it until I saw it again here, was, I could seeing a really strong match be misrepresented as a match in some way, with a lot, high centimorgans of one that you should definitely be related to, how it could end up being something that was totally off base. I don't think that happens as often as the false positives do. But it is, when you're comparing the matches on the smaller percentages, it's really important to look at the thresholds that the companies have, especially if you're going to use the third-party tools like GEDmatch and some of these others that are out there.
I do want to say something. I got really interested in having, I had my first, let's say, my mother has deceased, but she had 2 first cousins. So I wanted to have the 2 first cousins. I begged them both, they're in their 80s, to do Ancestry. And one was very interesting. I think he fell off the end when he got it, but just show, I have a point here to make, is that he did it. And my sister and I are probably his closest relatives, and we're first cousins once removed, but he's a half. So we knew it wasn't going to be that close, but he did it anyway because he's very interested in his Kentucky heritage. So he did it. Based on the percentages, he got this report back. He felt that his father's side, they're getting nothing. And there was nothing. There was nothing on his father's side at all. So and he wasn't surprised because he didn't think any of them were interested in DNA or had taken any tests or done anything. So it wasn't surprising. But my sister and I ended up to be the 11th and 12th closest match.
Really?
There were 10 people with huge percentages. Like, this person may be really close to you. Who is this? And bottom line, he realized that for his whole life, he had been focusing on kind of one side of his family. I won't get into it, but on one section of his family. And the other section, his maternal grandmother, who was not related to my sister and I, who was the one who was different, he had never really done much with that side. He had 10 people that had over 1,000 centimorgans.
Wow.
One of them had, I forget, like 1,450 centimorgans in 12 segments. Didn't have the foggiest who it was. But my point here is I learned that some families take these tests and are really into it. And some families, nobody takes a DNA test. Nobody does history. And we don't know, you can't get a lot of stuff if nobody shares or nobody takes the tests. But if people share and take the test, woohoo!
Yeah.
He had a gold mine.
You could discover all sorts of things with it.
So
and that's
interesting.
But that goes with, make sure people understand that there could be something they were prepared for or not prepared for.
Or not prepared for.
And one thing,
I'm
go ahead.
sorry. I just have one quick question, another basic one. When you send in a test, do they test all 46 chromosomes, or do they only test one chromosome when you do an AT test?
They test all of them because
So this raw data then should have the information for all your chromosomes.
yes, through the 46, because you also have the X and the Y, which is a bit of a different DNA that you deal with as opposed to just the general autosomal DNA, kind of like the mtDNA and the Y-DNA. But yeah, they kind of test it, and it's based on what's passed down in that vegetable soup on it or the bougou. And one thing too about Kentucky, and this This is not only Kentucky, and I'm really discovering it in the little villages in what is Poland today and West Prussia. Pedigree collapse. That is going to inflate some of your centimorgan percentages because you may be related to somebody and not necessarily 2 ways, but 3 or 4 ways sometimes. And that's something to consider too when we get looking at the matches and, you know, thinking about, well, are we really related to this person or not? Or, oh, this is a high amount of centimorgans, but in reality, it's probably maybe half that or a third that, just depending on where they're related. Which also brings a problem is, if you've worked with ancestry matches at any point in time, they're all the companies are also focusing on trying to help make the matches more useful to people with creating tools to where the person doesn't have to do as much to try to discover where the match is. Ancestry will highlight potential surnames or whatever that could be who you're related to. And so you bring up a match and it'll show you in common with the grandparents that you are in common with. And then it'll show you the surnames and stuff. And when you've got 3 or 4 or 5 surnames all in about the same range, you may have a pickle as far as that's when you got to really look at the paper trail. So you want to have a good paper trail at least up to the 5th generation to be able to do it. And with the autosomal DNA, you know that it goes about 5 or 6 generations on it. And second cousins, about a 99% chance that you're going to inherit DNA from them. Third cousins, it goes down a little bit. And as you go further back, it's going to be less and less and less. So when you get to those smaller percentages, it may be a grandparent that you inherited from, it may not. If your siblings have tested, you may not have inherited from that great-great-grandparent, but they may have, which may help out as well. So there's pros and cons to whatever way you do it, but you want to view those very carefully when you look at the small segments. But it does open up doors, and you discover family secrets. Like the video you looked at on YouTube, you know, she put a lot of examples up there of questions that she has had and things to consider. And I've uncovered a couple of secrets that was not commonly known, or was not known on our side of the family, but was known on the other side of the family. Other cousins have shared with me some of the secrets they uncovered that would not necessarily have come out through DNA, without DNA. And one example I can give of that is from the group that was coming over from West Prussia. He came over first, left her there with the kids. And I can't remember exactly, I have to look again, but say there was like three kids there. Then about a year later, he goes back to collect the family. I guess got him a job, got settled, and he brought 4 kids over. Well, he thought, you know, okay, she had a baby while he was gone, no big deal. Life went on. They had more kids once they got over here. Well, that 4th child's descendant was going to get married. Or well, this individual was going to get married. And they go through the wedding ceremony and talking about it and stuff. And the wife kind of pulls the bride to the side. And she says, you don't have to worry about it. Your kids are going to be smart. And she kind of looked at her like, what are you talking about? And she said, well, because he's not the father. And somebody else had come into the household at some point in time over there, I guess. And 9 months later, there was a child born. But paper trail would not necessarily have shown that, because it kind of would fall right in line with the timing and stuff. But the DNA showed it. And, you know, it was a sad way of how it kind of came out, because his wife knew before he knew. And they ended up changing their last name, but it resulted in a name change. but that's something that DNA may bring to light on there. What questions do you have about DNA in general? Because next time I'd want to kind of start focusing on working with matches a bit, the autosomal DNA. So do you have any specific questions? I mean, we can go through and talk about the different companies, but
Are the segments that, sometimes you hear the segments mean a lot, like, am I understanding a segment when it says on Ancestry 12 segments? I think there are only 24 segments. Aren't there only 24? So if you have 12 segments, that's a lot? Or am I confused on what segments is?
segment is a portion of what is on that chromosome. Chromosome and segments are not the same. There's not an equal number of segments. It all depends on what the company determines their segment to be.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so the segments can be large or small. The very, very, very important factor to remember is none of the companies at this point in time can tell you if that segment was mother, father, or combination of both by itself. Okay, so the longer the segment, theoretically, a theory is that the stronger the connection. But you have to test that theory as well, because it could be that 3/4 of that segment is from the maternal side and 1/4 of it is from the paternal side. And especially if you have pedigree collapse and stuff, that could be the case. But it can be anywhere. It might just be that it just kind of happens.
What's
So-
pedigree collapse?
Pedigree collapse is where you start going back and you find out that your third great grandparents have direct lines to you through 2 or 3 different people. I've got 4 lines that go back to Mary and Joseph, my Spencer clan. Okay, so I've got definite pedigree collapse. Technically, I've got less people to research than probably most of you all, because it's the same grandparents. At some point in time, they go back to the same grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-grandparents, or whatever.
How many lines did you say that went back that were identical, that went back to the same people? Was it 4?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
I only have,
They had a lot of
That's an
kids.
awful lot of- That's a lot of
That
first
is a
cousin
lot.
marriages, isn't
yeah,
it?
because I had
I had-
2. Like I said, my grandmother's parents were both descended from the same man, ironically through twins. So her father descended through one twin, and her mother through the other twin, from Eastern Kentucky. So, well, North Carolina to Eastern Kentucky. So, yeah. Now, also, while you explain that pedigree collapse, because you might be able to explain it better than I can understand it, but what's the difference between pedigree collapse and endogamy? Might be a trick question, because a lot of people use them interchangeably.
Right. Endogamy is where you get the Jews and the Finnish and stuff. You got people in the village that it's the same entire group of families, and they end up almost similar to pedigree collapse. And that's why a lot of people use them interchangeably.
Yeah.
But it could be different. This cousin marrying from that family, and then the brother marrying from this other family, tying them all in together to where the kids have more people. It collapses it, but it's not necessarily the same as the pedigree collapse.
Right, like the population might be big enough to where they all descend from, like, for instance, Ashkenazi Jews descend from the same 300 people
Right.
in Eastern Europe. That's where the genetic makeup goes. But of course, with over the so many years, you've got a lot of descendants. They're all technically related because it's a population base, but yet it's
Right.
not necessarily full pedigree collapse necessarily.
Bingo.
That's why when you see in Finding Your Roots, when Henry Louis Gates Jr., there are some people he will literally, here's your DNA result, and it's literally 100% Ashkenazi Jew. Now, did all the cousins marry each other? I mean, you're talking about somebody that grew up in New York. The Ashkenazi population for them was over in Europe. I don't know. Well, depending on the Holocaust when they came over. But I'm just saying that they, they weren't so close together that they're having the full collapse. But it is a population
Right.
group.
That's why they have their unique markers. because they can take that marker back to this particular time and this particular place that included like the 300 families. With pedigree collapse, it could be kind of working its way down where that happens more than one generation going through, and it's not necessarily an isolated population. Kind of like you were saying at the beginning, like the 300 people, that's more of an isolated population. It's, you don't go outside of this 300 people, but you've got 150 to choose from when you're kind of looking at the families and stuff. And then you can a lot of times move on out elsewhere. But when you're looking at these other places, it's a lot of times the same, very similar, but it's a little bit of a difference. It can happen in more places than just with a special marker. You're not necessarily going to get a unique marker that identifies it because it depends on when it happens. It could happen at any point in time.
You know,
If you just,
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, like, if you just got a group of families on an island and they, you know, you got 12 families on an island, they just started intermarrying and stuff, down the road, that could fall into endogamy. But initially, if they're coming and going from the island and stuff, it could be just pedigree collapse.
And I feel like that Eastern Kentucky is falling more and more into endogamy in a way.
In a way.
I mean, because especially because we've got an early population or group that settled in the Appalachian Mountains. We know where they were essentially coming from. Yes, there's going to be some random. It's not going to be as solid, I guess, as an endogamy like with Ashkenazi Jews, but it's a pretty solid group. And then they all just stayed there and reproduced over and over again. Yes, they moved back and forth a little bit, but yeah, it's like I'm almost feeling like Eastern Kentucky is starting to fall into that a little bit. But so, and I know this is a kind of not quite off topic, but have anybody heard of the Blue people of Kentucky? Yeah. So the Blue people, there was a group, and was it the Fugits was one of the family members of one of the family groups. There's a few family lines in Eastern Kentucky that they started being born with, their skin had a blue tint to it. It was kind of light, but it had a blue tint. But not everyone in the family was being born that way. It was like maybe sometimes half of the siblings were that way based on the DNA. Just think of the DNA. That's quite a great example of that, the DNA randomness of what we get. Now, a lot of people will look at that and go, oh, that's just, I've heard people say really negative things, like stereotypically, oh, well, that's just those hillbillies, you know, they're just inbreeding. That's what's happening. Turns out they did studies, and it turns out it was one guy that had one chromosomal anomaly. He was from France, and he came in, he settled, he married this girl with red hair from the Fugit family. And it turns out just that little mutation together, that those two blood groups got together, because you do actually find Blue people in Canada, which makes sense. You get a lot of French Canadians up there. There's also, I've heard of another batch out in Texas. And so I know that sounds odd. Oh, just random French guy comes into Eastern Kentucky. Well, with the development of that area, you get a lot of immigration from, that's why I think it's not purely endogamy, really. It's like, it's leaning that way, but yet you had a lot more of immigrant groups coming in with coal mining and logging and different things. And so which I was surprised. I went to a presentation. I think it was Walter did that presentation. And I was really surprised. He was showing us all the different immigrants that were coming in for work and showing their profiles, their pictures, and, you know, Italy, all these different places. So this one little thing, and yet it created this stereotypical thing as an example of why there's just inbreeding in Eastern Kentucky. It wasn't that at all. It was a genetic mutation, and it just happened to carry down. And yes, it did branch off into some cousins. There were some cousins that were marrying cousins, and it was repeating. So we're getting a little bit of pedigree collapse, but that was not the cause of it at all.
Right. And
So the definition of a pedigree collapse is basically cousins marrying cousins and that kind of thing. Because I've got one first cousin married in my ancestry, and my husband does also, at least one that we know of each. But that's what you mean by pedigree collapse.
Yeah, and it could even be second cousins, because you definitely inherit DNA from them, you know, and it usually runs into that. And like the one villages in Prussia, you know, cross-reference a lot of the surnames, just like you do kind of in Eastern Kentucky. I'm a Spencer. You can look at all the Spencers there. And I get tickled at my husband because, the Colstons, his family was like, well, that's a different group of Colstons. No, you just haven't traced your family back far enough. Because
Back far enough, we're all related, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You're related to them, but you just haven't gone back far enough.
Even
Right.
really, I mean, almost all of Europe could be considered endogamy. I mean, we're
Yeah.
all this, and yet they're trying to differentiate in those tests. Oh, well, you're this much French or this much Italian. Now, the only thing I think that really helps break apart some of that is not only did we had wars. I mean, think about the Romans. The Romans went all the way up, Hadrian's Wall. I mean, they went that far north, right? They literally that was like an invading force. They were settling there. There were literal Roman families that migrated there, had commerce centers there. That's one group. Then you have the Celts. Then that's another whole group that was all the way through into Turkey. I think the only thing about Europe is that it was an easy access place for a lot of different groups, outside groups. So that's what I think helps differentiate some of the European population, even though so much of us, once you got to a certain point, most of us just stayed in a very, very similar area. Not a ton of migration, really.
Well, and you think about that, and even if you went back to like Scotland or Ireland or some of them, people came over in groups, and they would bring some of that. If you go back far enough researching and you start hitting that, you're going to find more of that pedigree collapse in a sense because of them coming over from, villages. You go back, you go where people are known, where people, where you have a connection, and you see that depending on where you're looking, and they've been able to identify the markers for those three groups so far, but depending on, how they do it, in some ways it's kind of interesting because the Native American seems to be the broadest group in a sense of having so many different tribes and the US being as big as it is, whereas, Finland's kind of small. The Ashkenazi Jews, the Jews were kind of a cluster that isolated themselves in a sense from others. They didn't marry outside for the most part. If they did, it kind of went against the practice and stuff.
And yet what's frustrating about Jewish population to me is that they like to say, oh, Ashkenazi Jew, Sephardic Jews. I think they've identified a cluster of Italian Jews, but that does not that does not in any way represent the full Jewish population if you're talking about Jewish as a race because of the ancient lines. I mean, the fall of Jerusalem and the Romans taking so many of them, as slaves into Italy and all of this. So it doesn't dip down into the ancient lines. We literally have got Ashkenazi as this little Eastern, I was going to say Eastern Kentucky, Eastern European group. And I'm like, that's literally not the entire breadth of actual, those with heritage from, the area of Israel. And so that's where it's very deceptive right now. And the reason why, of course, that's not picking any of that up is because look how far back it is. We're talking 2,000 years. So, which again, another thing with your ethnicity results that I think you really is a weird argument. I think, like we talk about, hey, they try to get the 5 strongest ethnicities that you have ish. Some of them will give you 6 or 7, but we talk about that and we say, oh, well, it's going to give you ethnicity reports or results back, 5 generations or so, which is like, a couple hundred years maybe. But yet a lot of these companies will give you what they call your ancient DNA strains. So I don't know if you want to touch on that a little bit, Linda, because that's where they get into the hunter-gatherer. So what are they doing? Yeah. If they're telling you you're really only getting this DNA from here, they're literally looking at certain markers that are a part of other studies they've done, I'm guessing, to map out ancient lines. Am I explaining that right?
Well, that, and you can go into, like I said, you can look at the genome in many ways. And if you look at the mtDNA test and the Y-DNA test, they focus on the ancient origins. My MT came back as an origin of Croatia for the mtDNA, but that's only what I inherited down the line from that maternal ancestor.
So you have a line of Croatian mamas.
Yeah, that's Croatian mamas. And so, and National Geographic started out with trying to hit the hunter-gatherers and stuff. So the further back you go, you're going to encounter different populations. And so they kind of have to pick a time and a starting point. And I think they kind of go back like the generations that have been there for maybe half a dozen generations for the average person starting out. And then they try to work on going further back because, you know, Germany, we identified Germany here in the US in one of the census records, and it wasn't necessarily Germany, it was German speaking as opposed to Germany itself. And so that's why, the Polish, it's Poland now, but my ancestors were West Prussia, and majority of the records are in German. So it just depends on where the company chooses to find and locate the group and the time frame they're wanting to go back to of how long that group has been together with it.
Time we have left, can you say something about the Family Finder? I didn't quite understand that. Are you going to go over that next time?
Family Finder is your matches.
Right.
And we're going to kind of start looking at that next time around to kind of start.
I haven't gotten into that, and I didn't understand how to get into that.
Yeah, Family Finder is going to be those that you match the DNA with. And majority of the companies start out listing the ones you have the strongest match with and just kind of work your way down. So you hit the end of the list. One of them only goes to like 2,000. They only provide you with 2,000. 23andMe only gives you a cap of 2,000 matches. And even those, there's other criteria they follow as far as whether or not you see the match and how much of the match you can see. But that's kind of what I want to get us into so that you can actually start working with the matches. And between now and then, try to locate maybe a third cousin that you don't know who that cousin is, how they're connected, or even a second one if you don't know how. And kind of keep that in mind when we come back the next time to see if you can kind of figure out, we can talk about ways of working with that match in order to find out how they come about. How do you match that person? Because I know for me, for a long time, I was intimidated by a lot of the matches.
Are you talking about finding someone that has a lot of centimorgans or all these signs that look like we're related, but we don't know how?
Right.
By those. Okay.
Yeah, we want to kind of get into that so that you can apply some of these tools.
Okay.
And see what these tools do, because that's one of my goals, is that you come here, you want to learn more, but so many times we attend sessions and stuff and we learn it, but applying it to me sometimes is a disconnect. It's like, now what do I do?
Yeah.
And so if you can find somebody and you can start working your way through matching that person, then maybe, next time, maybe 2 or 3 times from now, you can come back and you can say, I now know where they match.
My heritage is real good about sending. I think I did mine a year ago with them, and at least twice a month, every other week or so, I'll get another 3rd to 5th cousin match, and I mean, they just keep sending stuff. So they're really good about that.
Well, and like I said, I've done more with Ancestry in the last several months of piecing together and trying to find, and it's not just a case, and think about it too, because this is a discussion group. Okay, not necessarily just a lecture group or whatever, it's a discussion group as well. And tips that you have, things to avoid. And chances are, I guarantee the things that to avoid, I've probably done them myself. But, because it's a hit and miss sometimes. But when you're working with matches, it does involve, sometimes it can be labor intensive because you're going to be building trees for people that don't have trees. I mean, it's not impossible to find a match if they don't have a tree. It's not
That's
necessarily
what I'm
impossible.
up against. The only ones I've found are the ones that actually do have their trees published. That's easy. But then the ones that don't
as long
have
as
a
you check
tree.
them, as long as you check and make sure they got the documentation.
Yeah, some are wrong.
Yeah, some
Right.
are yeah. And that's what you got to be careful of. And I mean, there's some out there that I don't care how many times I see it on Ancestry, I'm not making that connection.
How can you
Okay.
exist upon ancestry? My grandmother, can't believe it's my own grandmother. Her name is similar to another name once, and they were both died and lived the same years. So the dates are all the same on the gravestones. So this gal keeps on thinking she's related to me. And how do you get rid of them? It comes up, oh, check and evaluate. And I sent the gal a note and I said, this is not right. I know for a fact that is where my grandmother is buried. This is her stone. Yet how do you get rid of that when someone thinks?
Send her a copy of the receipt from the tombstone.
I don't know.
See, I've got the receipt. But yeah,
She doesn't know how to get it off of there either. I don't know. That could be too.
yeah, sometimes it's, because I joke around about Mary and Joseph. And I also have Moses, who was Joseph's son, because he had a lot of kids. And now with doing West Prussia, I go all the way back to Abraham. Now, Abraham DeMero, was only in the 1600s there, but I could say I've got my line back to Abraham. I went another generation the past couple of weeks. But they have Joseph married to a Mary. Okay. And for years, even in the paper trail before computers, they said it's Mary Rauschenberg. Forgive me if I mispronounce it, because obviously I'm not much French. If there's any in there, I can't get the French down, if it is French. And from Talbot County, Maryland. Well, there was a Joseph Spencer in Talbot County, Maryland, who married a Mary de Rochebroom, but he died in Talbot County, Maryland. My Joseph Spencer is in Eastern Kentucky, Lee County, Virginia. Well, I don't think he made it to Kentucky, but Moses did. But Lee County, Virginia. We've done a Spencer study on the Y-DNA, and we've got him in North Carolina. Now, we haven't got him back to England yet, but he's one group in there, a solid group, and there's multiple groups, and we'll get into that when we start talking more about the Y-DNA and that kind of stuff. But I am not found any evidence to say that her last name was de Rochebroom. No marriage records or nothing. And either they're disintegrated, they're gone, they were destroyed or something, or we just haven't looked in the right place. But from Talbot County, Maryland to South Carolina, well, maybe he did, got off the boat for a while, got hitched and moved down there, but not to this Mary de Rochebroom, because they're up there in Talbot County still buried. But you're not going to change some people's minds. They're going to be convinced of it. You're just going to have to accept you're not going to do it. You've got some people who don't care enough to really do the documentation. There's a Facebook group for, there's several Facebook groups actually, but for those who are adoptees and stuff. And I've been a member of it for a while. And, it's really sad when you see people getting on there going, well, I've got my line back, but I can't find anything. And now I find out it's the wrong line. Because all of a sudden they got this big tree, but they pulled it off of ancestry from somebody else. And so it's so important to say the documentation.
I find half of ancestry, I see something that's there and I know that isn't true. And I write them and they say, well, I got that from another ancestry person that had, and so they perpetuate the same mistake.
Yeah.
It'll get copied 20 times. The wrong thing will be copied 20 or 30 times.
And it's amazing how obstinate people are in regards to fiction. Like they have this, they just get so into this. Now, my only advice, I always tell people, because we get people that get so frustrated. They're like, oh my gosh, this tree just keeps getting repeated out there. And it's terrible. It's a whole forest of falseness. And I always tell people, try to document the proof you're trying that is wrong. Whatever it is that's wrong in their line, document it in a way that you get it published in something, journal article somewhere out there, because eventually that's not just an online tree. Yes, put it on the online tree, but put it somewhere else to where someone else will cite that eventually people will cite it, and then all of a sudden they'll be repeating the truth instead of the fiction. And so it's more
Good idea.
insidious, but that's about the only way I can say that's a little bit more permanent than those online trees. But
And
That's a
some
good
of it
idea.
are innocent people trying to find their line. And when you tell them it's wrong, they have no clue how to fix it because all they did was get up and do the hints.
right, they've been
You
doing
know.
shortcuts.
They've been doing the shortcuts because that's what Ancestry says on TV.
That's what they sell. Yeah.
Yep.
You
Make it-
follow the leaves and stuff. And so they do. So, in their defense, in a sense, it's kind of an innocent thing. But ideally, they will hopefully learn and pick up on. And, I always try to encourage people to have the documentation, put it up there if you know what you've got. And that doesn't mean that something might not come along and change it at some point in time, because they are uncovering more and more documentation, more and more information is getting out there. And somebody might come across a record that would say, well, this throws that into question.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a family history where a person was bound out to, we think, their grandparents. And we have done a Y-DNA study, and there is a good chance that that was the grandparent, but we still don't know the father. And there is one person on the family tree that has kind of guessed it because they have all this past history. It can go back a long way.
Right.
That this one little spot. And she just has a question mark. And so that if someone goes in there and looks at it, they'll hit it and say, oh yeah, that's right, and just put it on. But you know what? A lot of the members have said that's, a lot of us that are related go, that can't be right. Why are you doing that? And I think she did it because she just wanted to be able to put the tree way back, even though she knows this is a problem
Mm-hmm.
and knows that she knows it.
Now,
But
one
that's
thing,
you.
yeah. One thing I love about what Ancestry does try to, and has made more of an attempt to come up with useful little tools. And I do like the fact that they allow us now to put on there, we're actively researching and stuff, because I do have a tendency to put up, I can link sometimes 2 or 3 censuses for the same person until I figure out which one is actually the correct one based on the other evidence, especially if there's more than one of the same name or something like that. And I like to mark actively researching because my tree is public because of the DNA wanting to make those connections. But if you can identify, and even little tools of relationships, or they died young, there's all kinds of little clues you can put up there. But if you've got proven on there or whatever, then it lets the other person know that, okay, they feel well documented. But if it's actively researching, then if you're really going to take that seriously, you deserve to have that mistake, because it's, I'm just working with it. I'm not really saying it's done. But not everybody catches that. And the leaves don't tell you that necessarily, unless you really look at the tree.
Yeah.
I don't remember if it was Ancestry or something else, but wasn't there a place where you could write a little note of your own thing? Is that on Ancestry? I've forgotten.
A lot of them have, for
you
DNA
could add a
purposes, a
note.
lot of them have where you can put notes, but Ancestry does have a note taking thing, but I don't know that people know that it's there, or
They
if
use
it's
it.
necessarily available to them or use it.
Yeah.
But I've used that as kind of a scratching pad sometimes too. When I find something that I don't have time to investigate now, but I want to go back to later.
Or if you find something is wrong, you
Right,
can put it
you know
there
it's
to
wrong,
correct
put it
information.
there.
Yeah.
And I've got to where I'm starting to put it in the timeline there, where it gives you the source and it allows you to put in comments and stuff. I'll make little notes there to kind of alert people. But again, they have to be looking at it.
Yeah.
So
they have to care.
Yeah.
That it's there.
And a lot of people don't. And so there's not a whole lot you can do about that, because just like with DNA, there's a lot of DNA out there that the person has no idea what it is. The cousin asked to do a sample, they did a sample, and that's the last they care about it. So you won't hear back from them.
There's something on Ancestry. If you see a mistake there in a tree or something, you can make a little note about it?
I think so. It's been a while since I've looked at that.
Well-
and I don't remember if I actually used that. I just remembered seeing it. And I believe it's Ancestry.
I've written
Ancestry.
back to some of the people that, put them on, and most of the time they don't do anything about it. But I didn't know.
Usually I try to respond if somebody comes up, because sometimes my collateral information that if I've done a census or something and it's kind of done it, or somehow I inadvertently, I'm not perfect. So I've done things that I'm look back going, who in the world put that on there? Oh, I'm the only one that can get in there. I guess it was me, But even on the transcriptions, you can go in and make a correction or a suggestion. And they've gotten really good about putting it up and showing it. Like on a census, if you see the wrong transcription for something there. The problem is when you do see a hint and you put that hint in there on a census, they want to put it exactly as it is in a census. And if the transcriber said H ? TER, if you're not careful, that's what's going to pop up. And if you don't catch it, then that's going to be, show up as wrong. But you got to be fastidious in some ways of attaching things.
I've seen on some of the things and on, I guess it's on the Ancestry, or when you go into the census and people have gone in and corrected the names.
Mm-hmm.
Because how do you do that?
When I don't know, I haven't looked at it recently. I've been going myself recently. Used to, there was a little thing on there when it brought up the information about it on the side. You could bring it over more. Next time I'll prepare to have that as we'll bring up Ancestry Live and screenshot some of that for you. But you can find a way to go in and look at the reels of film on Ancestry. And you can bring up the transcriptions of each page. And when you look over to the side to see what was transcribed, there's a little thing down towards the bottom that has, notes. And then you can go in and click on that and you can put in the correct note. And then it has a thing for the reason. And it could be transcription error is a majority of what I do. The transcription error, click that, and then it brings it up for that person and puts the name up there. And it's the, when you bring up the image of the document, on the right-hand side, you've got a toolbar. And you've got one that looks like little tools. And if you click on that, that's going to bring out the transcribed information.
Okay.
And you look on what that information shows. And like I said, I'll make a point of demonstrating that next time so you can actually see how it goes. But the problem is, and I've noticed this with the rolls of microfilm I've been going through page by page, is if that page has not been transcribed, you can't access it's not been transcribed, even though that's an option that comes down. So I still put a little note on there and say, this page has not been transcribed. Because I've gotten to really use the shoebox a whole lot. But does everybody use Ancestry? Anybody not use it?
Depends on what you mean using it for. I use it for searching, but yet I don't have an account, and the only DNA in there is my brother's.
Okay. But you can access the DNA.
I can see his matches. I can't always see their trees though. Like I'm not logged in. Do you know what I mean?
Oh,
like
okay. Yeah, to see their trees.
Mm-hmm.
See that you all have to tell me that, because I've been a member of Ancestry for a long time and I just forget that some of that stuff's not accessible to anybody. But pick out a match or two, and on your DNA, autosomal, that you're trying to figure out what the connection is, jot down what you know based on what you can find at that point, as far as what you know about the individual, what information they're providing, whether it's even part of a tree or whatever. Just take a look and analyze what you see there with whatever company, and then bring it back, and we'll see if we can't kind of, depending on if it's a smaller group, we might be able to actually kind of walk through some of them to kind of see or suggest what to look for to help do this. Because when you work with matches, you start doing this roller coaster. You're going back, you're bringing the people down, you're going back, you're bringing the people down to find where the correct match is. And that might not make sense now, but when we get in there and actually do some, you'll kind of see where that kind of comes into play.
That's good. I'm looking forward to that. I want to know how to do that. That's good.
There was something that I kind of was like, okay, I kind of see this, but how do I do it? How do I get there from here?
Yep.
And it helps. And it's a little harder on those that don't have trees, but it's not impossible. There are ways to do it on there.
You know, it is very uplifting to know that I think Ancestry does a good job. I found a first cousin once removed, didn't know, was my grandfather's brother's grandson. Nobody knew this section of the family. He pops up and he lives in the same town as my nephew.
Yeah, isn't that something?
And when I moved, I said something to him. This guy just lit up. He said he had no connections, didn't know anybody, anything. It has been such a wonderful thing. So I can say Ancestry does, you know, I've had some really good results from it.
And they try. I've gone out to my favorite place, Salt Lake City, Utah, 2 years now. And they always have a booth set up and they give like live demos and stuff. And I think they really try to make it more and more user friendly. I think they see the significance and importance, especially with tying in the DNA.
Yeah.
And so they try to come up with the tools and stuff. And, you know, it's a process. You can't take anything for granted that pops up there without fully vetting it to make sure that it fits, whether it's documentation or DNA. You're going to have to look at DNA the same way you do the documentation.
Yeah.
On Ancestry, I've never looked at DNA. Can you look at the DNA for different families?
If you have a sample up there, well, it gives you, they will not show you the segments, centimorgans, and that kind of thing. They've introduced, I think they give you like the longest segment maybe, or how many long, they give you a little bit enough, but not enough to where you could compare chromosomes and stuff. And last I heard, they don't really have any intention of doing that, but the other companies will. And we can look at some of those firsthand. And the book kind of gives some examples of some of those. And his illustrations are pretty good on those.
You can do like Family Finder of the DNA and on Ancestry.
It's the shared matches is what it is, the same as family. Each company has its own little name for the same sort of thing, just like you can say AtDNA or autosomal DNA. And Sherry tries to get me to say autosomal DNA. But that's the DNA that's going to cover both sides of the family and gets more relevant, more recent connections. And you can take it back. And remember, the oldest person you test is going to go back the same number of generations to get you even further back. But it's going to take a careful look at, and that's why some of these tools are really pretty good as far as depending on how you work with them and what your comfort zone is on how you want to do it. Because there's some of us that are perfectionists, not me, and there's others who are, you know, let's get the job done, let's get it done right, but I'm not necessarily going to guarantee that I can cross every T and dot every I. But it's enough to get it and prove what I'm, or disprove, because you want to either prove it or disprove it.
Next time too, we're also going to dig, I know, a little bit further into GEDmatch to show you how those percentages can be expanded upon. Because although I was playing with some while I was listening to us, And I got into one that was, because they're very, very focused. They're different scientific studies on different groups, little pockets of things. There was one that was, I decided to test it. It was like the certain lab plus Japanese. I'm like, all right, let's put that in there. I came out like 23% Japanese. And well, I'm not 23% Japanese, however, because it never shows up in any of the other tests. But that's just the power of the sampling population, and so we'll see that play out a lot more in GEDmatch, which is a tool that we'll introduce you to a little bit more next week or next month. Dear God,
next month. Yeah, please. But yeah, GEDmatch is used by users for working with the data, but it's also used by scientists, professors, and other people who conducting studies, and they're target specific studies. And so that's what comes up with some of the different algorithms that focus on, Japanese and Native American heritage and that kind of thing. So it's kind of fun to play with, to see what's in there and what's not and what it has to offer. But it's fun.
It's fun.
Even if you bang your head against the wall and you got a bruise and a big knot on the head, it's still fun.
Yeah. All right. Any last questions? We're right at around 4:00.
I have one that's kind of unrelated, but I'm interested in, do all of you do color coding? So you've segregated your maternal and paternal and do all this color coding?
Mm-hmm.
I just bought a new program that does that. I haven't done it yet. I haven't tried to figure it out. What's the secret to it?
Well, I was just going to ask, I don't think on Ancestry does it, so you have to buy a program.
I just bought Roots Magic. I haven't used it before.
Legacy has it. I don't know. I haven't checked on Roots Magic. I think they have it. I use it on DNA on Ancestry. Now, DNA Ancestry has where you can, but you've got certain colors that you can attribute to something. And so when I'm looking at a match and I'm just doing the initial look at it, I will, put it on maternal side or paternal side. And if I know which kind of line, I might add that in the note so that when I pull them up, I've got it in a group. So you can create groups in the Ancestry DNA where.
I gotta figure that out. Okay. All right. So it is on Ancestry DNA. And I should be able to do that. All right. That's my goal for next month. I got to figure out how to do that.
One thing I did change, I started out, because you can make the colors, label them whatever you want.
Right.
And I took the sets of grandparents and attributed them to each one so that now when I go in, if I can attribute it to a particular one, or some of them I've got 2 or 3 groups in because of the 2 or 3 different lines it could go through as far as grandparents go.
Oh, really?
And so that way you can sort the groups and kind of work with them along with the shared matches.
I was 8 because I wasn't going to do 16. I can go back to 16 but 1 is a little shaky. So I was going to do just 8. Okay.
And that's fine.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right. Well, I got it. That's a goal for next month.
Well, I've enjoyed this. I hope y'all got something out of it today.
Yes. A lot more questions than answers, but that's the way it is with genealogy. Always more questions than answers.
Shoot us, shoot the questions out there.
And don't be afraid to, if you have to, reread the chapters, a couple times.
Yeah, I got it.
I think what will happen is as we go along, certain things will start to click. Certain things we've heard before will build upon, what we learn, and it'll help kind of. Yeah, it is a big puzzle, and
And sometimes going back just makes things click.
And do you keep your raw data on just a zip drive or something? So if I download it, I should probably just make a separate little zip drive.
Yep, and they're not super large files, so they're easy to keep. I've got them on multiple computers and a couple of external drives,
and in the cloud and on external.
Even on just little drives. Yeah.
Oh, and that's what I need to do too. You have good questions. I should look at my sister's raw data and just see if they're the same. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that would
I hear that the the library's open also, because I tried to get something copied. The only book I could find was in the Historical Society, and I'm out in Connecticut, and
Oh,
I guess it was COVID. They said they couldn't send me a copy of some pages, but you think now if I asked for it, they could send them to me.
boy, you must have hit that window where like we literally, there's a tiny, like a couple months where we weren't really here on site. So yeah, I would try again. But by the way, Kathy, that's another thing too that GEDmatch allows you to do. You can take the one-to-one comparison. So you literally can just plug those in, take those two. Once you plug in both of your DNA, your raw DNA, you can really play with that. And so you literally can look at that and see where your differences are. So that would be really cool.
Well, that should be fun, because I do. Yeah, like I said, I'm my nephew's mother.
Yeah.
But it does look like it is interesting. So okay, well, good.
And I swear I have pedigree collapse. I have ancestors from Eastern Kentucky, but my uncle is not my father and my grandfather. I swear.
And you are not your own grandma.
That's right.
We should end on that.
San Diego. Just he said he's from Connecticut. I live in San Diego, so
Okay.
we
You got the heat wave.
cover the whole country.
Good day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you from Eastern Kentucky, where they all married cousins.
There you go. We must be cousins then.
Probably.
We're all related.
That's something we should do, is we should test our little groups once we get into like GEDmatch and see.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah,
it's,
those are
Right.
cousins. That would be really cool.
Yeah.
Good.
Well, have a good weekend, you guys. What's
Yep,
up?
have a
Thank
good
you,
one.
ladies. We appreciate it very much. Thank you.
thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Bye.
You're welcome. Bye.